Is he going to make it? Is he going to win? Find out next on Izzy's quest for Olympic gold on TNT Toon. I'm Sam Aronow, and this is the recap video for my special on the history of Pasadena and its Jewish community, where I talk about things I left out of the video, correct mistakes that I made in the video, and answer questions from Gaon and Navi level patrons on Patreon. Full disclosure, this video was a dumb idea, but it's also something I really wanted to do because when else would I get the chance? And as a result, this is going to be a fairly short recap. Only one correction/elaboration today. The use of the term Tongva isn't as obsolete as I made it out to be, but it's definitely trending in that direction, because the term Tongva was misidentified as the name of the Indian nation by an ethnographer named Charles Hart Merriam, who was actually a zoologist. He wasn't a linguist by training, and he was actually studying Indigenous Americans in order to learn more about local animals. He wrote that down in 1905, and the term had never existed before, so Kizh is increasingly the preferred term. That said, there isn't really a consensus on this yet. In fact, the most common term used by the Kizh people right now is actually still the Spanish term Gabrieleño, because they didn't really exist as an organized political entity prior to the Spanish colonization. In fact, they still don't. With only a handful of exceptions like the Chumash and Kumeyaay, the vast majority of Aboriginal tribes who lived within the areas of Spanish control, who were, for lack of a better term, Hispanicized, are not federally recognized tribes. So there have been several different organizations trying to create a tribal government, and their uses of the terms vary, but all of them at least sometimes use the term Gabrieleño. With that out of the way, let's get to the questions. Navi level patron Ian York asks, I was wondering, how did the Jewish population of California react to the growth of Filipino populations in California, especially after World War II? I'm wondering because my grandma and her family came over from Manila as a war bride after World War II, and since California already had a sizable Filipino population, how did the local Jewish populations react? I don't think there was a Jewish reaction to post-war Filipino immigration. I don't know why there would be. There is, of course, a stereotype, certainly in the United States, I don't know about elsewhere, that the descendants of immigrants, or even immigrants themselves, take issue with or even look down on newer immigrants and kind of belittle their experiences or qualifications. But insofar as that's the reality, it tends to be more the case within a particular national or ethnic interest group. And of course, that can play into a lot of regional or ethnic or socioeconomic tensions within the country of origin. And I wouldn't say that the Jewish population is immune from that. Like the Pittsburgh platform, as I've said, reads to me as a very clear, consciously or otherwise, reaction to the incoming wave of Jews from Eastern Europe to the US, which very much challenged the character of the existing Jewish population. But that's very much the exception. And it's much the same towards non-Jewish immigration as well. I know that the first Jewish member of Congress was a know-nothing who literally terrorized Irish immigrants in Philadelphia, but in the greater scheme of things, Jewish American nativists are very rare. Gaon-level patron Learn a Bit asks, when my mom and especially my grandma were growing up in LA in the 70s and 50s/60s respectively, they were both told by friends and family that Jews weren't welcome in Pasadena. Their outside impression of Pasadena at the time was that it was a highly exclusive and wealthy WASP enclave that remained unwelcoming long after Jews had been largely accepted into the American mainstream. Is there any truth to this perception? Were Jews excluded in any way from life in Pasadena? What if I told you this was a question that's come up multiple times with people since this video came out? Some time ago, I was riding on the Long Island Railroad behind a retired doctor who was rehearsing a speech on Jewish history for the Leo Baeck Institute. And when we got to talking, and I mentioned that I was from Pasadena and had made this video, he kind of stood back and said, "Really? I thought Pasadena was very Goyish." And I take his use of Goyish not just to mean not very Jewish, but specifically very waspy. As I recall, someone in the comments even expressed surprise that Jews had been allowed to live in Pasadena, when in reality, of course, it wouldn't exist in its present state without us, And I would hope that my video made that clear, but I understand completely why people think this, because there really are two sides to this city. There's the one most people visit, and there's the one where most people actually live. So here's Pasadena as it exists today. Take it in, because you don't actually see the full present-day map in the video itself. I completed it just for this recap. And for the Israelis who asked in the comments, Pasadena is almost exactly the same land area as Tel Aviv, but with only about a third the population. And traffic isn't as much of a problem in Pasadena, though Pasadena does have a higher rate of car ownership than Tel Aviv, because it's only 1/3 of the population. It's on a grid, and we have a train. We've still got one train, and lots of wide, straight streets. Now, the thing that stood out to most people when they first saw this map was the 210 freeway, which runs right through the city. And that was very much by design, because it was planned along a major racial and socioeconomic divide in the city. Now, I'm going to highlight the actual limits of the city of Pasadena itself, because you can see from this that the area north and east of the 210 is only about a third of the city's land area. And yet, 55% of Pasadena's population live in that 1/3. In fact, a third of the population live in just this area, which is as densely populated as downtown, and that includes the area where I grew up. So my Pasadena, the Pasadena of my upbringing, was very black and Mexican and Guatemalan and Armenian and Japanese. And those who weren't were mostly artists or civil servants or working class. However, the vast majority of people who are visiting Pasadena, whether it's for Caltech or the Rose Bowl or even JPL, never see that side of Pasadena. And with very few exceptions, they're arriving in the city from Los Angeles, which means they're coming from the south or the west, which means they're arriving through neighborhoods like Oak Knoll or Madison Heights or Annandale or Linda Vista, which are the wealthiest and whitest neighborhoods. And they'll also be passing through areas like South Pasadena and San Marino, which are not technically part of Pasadena, but very much extensions of it, and are as well very wealthy and white, or East Asian. And of course, South Pasadena didn't allow black residents until 1948 with the Supreme Court decision, and de facto remained segregated until the 1968 Civil Rights Act. And in fact, San Marino banned Jews over the same period. Whereas all of us on the other side of the freeway, we're up against the mountains. Nobody's coming through here. There's nothing beyond. This divide is the defining divide in Pasadena politics, because most politically active people in places like Oak Knoll and Annandale and the like want the prestige of living in a big city, but not the actual responsibilities of big city. Very anti-development, very non-egalitarian, and if I may say, engage in a lot of tacit elitism and racism. I know people who are from these areas and they're not like that, but they definitely know people who are, and they'll be the first to tell you. And the net effect of that is that Pasadena has all the problems of a big city and all the problems of a small town. And that's the recap. Special thanks to my patrons, including Mir Akbar Ali, Jeremy Biskin, Boris Cherny, FC, Matthew Feinberg, Jay Fleischman, Oshar Gordon, Bob Huddy, Raphael Kellerman, Sol Cohn, Jacob Kossoff, Eric Liederman, Jeffrey Schweitzer, and Ian York. And I'll see you soon.